Okay, we'll get started. I'm Travis Burton. I'm the Director of Political Affairs here at the Kentucky Chamber of Commerce. Here at the Chamber, I work a lot on education and workforce policy. I'm also the husband of a kindergarten teacher, and so education is very important to me, and I'm excited to be able to be here today with you, and I want to thank everyone for joining us. We've got a great panel and a great discussion lined up. Today, as you know, we're going to be discussing education and workforce issues and how COVID-19 have impacted our education systems and our workforce availability and what that's going to look like going forward here in Kentucky. This webinar is a part of Restart Kentucky, an initiative formed by the Kentucky Chamber of Commerce to start having the discussions that need to happen so that we can safely reopen Kentucky's economy. Just a few logistical notes. The webinar today will be an hour long, and we have received questions from you, the audience, as you've registered, and we also have a chat box that we'll try to keep an eye on for additional questions to incorporate into the discussion. Please know that these webinar series are highly attended, well attended, and so we do have a certain number that we can't let everyone in on every single webinar, but these are recorded and available on our website at kychamber.com. It's kychamber.com. And so we've had a few webinars already focused on economics and health. And so now today we will turn our attention to education and workforce. I have said enough, and I'm very excited to turn things over to our panel. And today we have with us Kentucky Community and Technical College System President Jay Box. I'd also like to thank KCTCS and Dr. Box for their partnership in Restart Kentucky. They are our official education and workforce partner for this initiative, and we appreciate them and all they are doing to help guide this conversation about restarting our economy. In addition, we have Interim Commissioner of Education, Kevin Brown. He's been very busy the last few months, and we really appreciate him taking the time to be with us today. We have the Council of Post-Secondary Education President, Aaron Thompson, Dr. Aaron Thompson. And we also have President and CEO of the Pritchard Committee for Academic Excellence, Bridget Blum-Ramsey. So we appreciate these individuals for being here. And leading the discussion today is going to be Dr. Chris Williams, the Chancellor of KCTCS. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to her. Again, thank you all for being with us today.
Thanks, Travis. I appreciate it. I'm looking forward to working with my colleagues here through those things that higher education and K12 education and our partners are doing to meet workforce challenges post-COVID-19. And it seems we ought to start with a brief look at the state of education right now. So I'm going to start with Dr. Thompson. Can you give us a summary of the university's current status?
Thanks, Dr. Williams. Good to see you. Good to see everybody on Zoom. I've seen you several times today, I feel like, so good to see you again. It is important for me to make this statement before I answer your question directly, Chris, that to me, this conversation is about the economy also. Education separated from the economy just doesn't make sense. You don't have a strong economic system or a strong workforce system without having a strong education system. You can't have this conversation without understanding that, in my case, higher education matters to such a degree that we are surely in the mix of it. So as a part of your answer, our universities now are in the middle of providing PPE, providing healthcare to those that need it, providing education still to the students to get them through the pipeline, still in the process of making sure those that are the most disenfranchised, the homeless, the international students and others have a place to live and food to eat. So we're still doing the business and we're still open. But once again, it's impossible to have this conversation about where we go in the new normal without thinking about higher education, both our community and technical colleges, in which Dr. Box will eloquently talk about, to our four-year institutions. It's impossible to think about the future without that. We can't rebuild the economy without a strong education system. So we're in the state of trying to figure out what the new normal is. We're in a place of defining, if you will, what does it mean to fully open in the fall or late summer? What does it mean for us to think about how we shape not only our campuses to be ready for the new process we're going to use as we're defining it, but truly how to still educate in the relative, what I call meantime. So we're in a state of action. We're dynamic. We're not in a state of flux, if you will, in that regard, because we're still doing the business we've been charged to do. But we are in a state of redefinition. We are in a state of thinking innovation for the future. We are in a state of having conversations with all those that we need to make sure we do this in a safe, considerable way, but a considerate way.
Thanks, Dr. Thompson. Dr. Box, we know that KCTCS colleges are in session in a regular term, but all coursework has been moved to remote instruction. Can you give us a summary of current status of the 16 KCTCS colleges?
Sure, Dr. Williams. It's good to be with you today. First of all, it was about mid-March when we decided to move everything online and remote learning. For KCTCS, that was not a big jump for us because right now, about 25% of our students are totally online students anyway, and about 65% of our students take at least one online course. So moving the entire delivery of our coursework to an online environment was not a big, heavy lift for our faculty and staff. Of course, all our faculty and staff are working remotely now, and we do have a very robust student services support online, which is very helpful for the students so that 24/7, if they have any issues, they can call in and get some assistance. Plus, our faculty are doing a tremendous job with helping our students in this remote learning environment to be as successful as they possibly can during this time. We've had to address some things, such as our technical programs that do have some labs they need to complete. Right now, we are postponing that lab work until hopefully the latter part of May. We're hopeful that we'll be able to complete that by the end of May. If we're not able to, those students will get an in-progress grade and will be able to complete later on. For our nursing students, they've been able to pretty much do their clinical work. They're working locally with their local healthcare providers and being able to work that out. One of the big challenges for us has been dual credit, and I'm sure Kevin will speak a little bit more about that in a minute, but we've been trying to work with the school districts to make sure the dual credit students are able to complete their work, the high school students complete their dual credit work by the end of the term. KCTCS did decide that we are going to stick with giving true letter grades, A, B, C, D, and E, if a student completes the coursework. If they do not, again, they'll get an in-progress grade. But the reason for that is that our students that transfer not only to Kentucky colleges, but colleges outside of Kentucky, and many universities will not accept a pass-fail grade, so that we're continuing to give letter grades. That's an update for us.
Thanks very much. Commissioner Brown, how are schools completing this year since the governor is not allowing school buildings to reopen?
Thank you. Thanks everyone for joining. And similar, I think I've heard Dr. Box and also Dr. Thompson say that while buildings are closed on post-secondary campuses, same as elementary and secondary, education is still ongoing. So buildings are closed, but we're still having school. I'm really proud of our local school districts. In mid-March, the end of the second week of March, we had 83 school districts that were approved to deliver non-traditional instruction in Kentucky. And these were it now sounds quaint to have an NTI, 1 or 2 NTI days for a snow day, or maybe an ice storm would put you out a week, or a flu for 2 or 3 days. And so that was less than half of our school districts. Within about 5 days after the COVID-19 crisis began, we were able to get all school, and we, meaning the education community, we had all 172 school districts with an approved NTI application, and they were ready and already delivering non-traditional instruction all across the state, and continue to do so today. That's a huge feat. Many of those districts also began summer feeding programs that can be used. They're called summer feeding programs because that's when they traditionally occur, but we're using the federal summer feeding program now. Many of those same districts that were new to NTI instruction within the same day began offering food for students and families to pick up. So it's an amazing story. However, we know we're still not reaching every child. We do not reach every child when we have a traditional day, a traditional sunny day when we have great attendance in our public schools. We're not reaching every child. We have disengaged students. We have, as we obviously know, achievement gaps in various areas, and we are not going to be reaching a disengaged student probably through NTI. However, there are some bright spots. We're hearing, if you just get on social media, I think you'll see a lot of great stories out there about how teachers are really using innovative ways to talk to their students and or have conversations with them and engage them in learning. So the governor, we knew it was coming, that the decision that we had a small sliver of hope that we would be back in our buildings, but we know that's not going to happen. And so we are requiring all school districts in Kentucky to meet the 1,062 hours, which is the minimum instructional requirement. And I just want to point out for those watching, the Wall Street Journal yesterday issued an article that said some school districts around the country plan to end the year early, and they call remote learning too tough. And in Kentucky, our districts are rising to the occasion. It is far from perfect, but we should be proud as Kentuckians that we have every district trying to offer this instruction based on the minimum instructional requirement.
Thank you, Commissioner. I'm going to ask now that all of you think ahead to the fall. We have recommendations from the White House, recommendations from the governor's office. I know things are still in flux, but can you give me your best information now for how education will get started in the fall? And Commissioner, let's start with K12. Clearly, students may have lost learning opportunities or information. That summer slide may be bigger than usual. Can you speak to plans as schools begin after the summer break?
Sure, we have districts already making plans for that. The unfortunate thing is while we have all districts, we have a consistency of all 172 offering basic instruction through NTI through the traditional school period. It's not going to be consistent across the state, unfortunately, for summer programs. Districts are trying the best they can. Some have more resources than others. We have around 19 districts that are participating in the Summer Boost program that is held in conjunction or in tandem with the summer feeding sites, and we're hoping to increase the number of participation. Jefferson County, for example, schools had a backpack league last summer aimed at literacy and numeracy instruction over the summer for those students that really needed it. I think they are looking towards converting that to a complete online solution, and we know other districts are looking at similar options. However, it will not be consistent across the state, which concerns me. And then when we get into the fall semester, we really don't know what to predict. What phase the state will be in as far as our reopening is still unclear. We know what the phases are. We just don't know when we will get there. And so we are advising districts to have a menu of options available to them. Obviously, we want to see a traditional opening day with school buses full and parents lined up dropping their kids off, and a 400 capacity school has 400 kids in it. We also know that districts have to be prepared to perhaps stagger schedules. Also, and we're hearing from some other school districts around the country and CDC, we may need to be prepared to have a period where you're in school on staggered schedules, and then there may be a 2 to 3 week period where we're doing NTI, and then maybe we come back in on a normal schedule through the holiday break. So we're really going to have to steer districts to being prepared to select from a menu of options.
Thank you. I want to thank folks for putting questions into the chat box, and thank our panel participants who are answering those questions as we go along. So appreciate everybody being very interactive here. Ms. Ramsey, given the Pritchard's Committee mission around educational excellence and concerns I'm sure that people are having around this remote and online instruction, what would your organization want to see as a focus as education restarts in August after summer offerings? Can't hear you. I'm sorry, we can't hear you. Unmute.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris, for the question, and thank you to KCTCS and the Chamber for hosting this conversation. As we think about reopening in the fall, I think it's really important to first understand what we're really doing well right now and what's working to keep kids connected and to support their continued learning. And one of the things we hear repeatedly from educators is the heightened sense of connection, which sounds kind of counterintuitive. But our teachers have been doing a lot of good work to maintain connections with students, either remotely, by phone call, or in other ways. And I think that's critically important that we figure out how to maintain those rich connections as we move into the fall as a way to ensure connection to all of our students, those sometimes historically underserved as well. And the other part that we've heard from educators in this moment in time when we have shifted to remote learning and creative ways of delivering content, our students may actually be developing those transferable skills much more rapidly, the transferable skills that the business community really wants to see. So creativity, communication, problem solving. And so I think there's an opportunity at this point in time to really understand the power in developing those transferable skills. So I hope we hold on to that as we go back to some level of traditional schooling in the fall. The concerns, I think, are that there's academic loss, there's learning loss during this time. And so how do we quickly diagnose that in the fall when students do come back at some level to the traditional building? And so I think our educators need to be positioned to diagnostically assess students quickly and understand what they've lost, what they've gained, where we need to meet them to ensure that they continue their progress academically. Remote learning, I think, has been mentioned by a number of panelists. It certainly is maybe the phrase of the year in 2020. And so better understanding what's working in remote learning and what the challenges are will be critical as we move into the fall. Maybe no more so critical than because we are entering a new normal without a doubt. And we'll probably be intermittently social distancing from one another for some time into the future. So embracing this new normal, ensuring that we extract the power in it will be critical for continued academic success and educational progress for the state.
I appreciate you saying that. You know, at KCTCS, when we talk about remote learning, we have students with no internet access driving to our campuses. We have a number of challenges. So you're right, that really encompasses a broad breadth of opportunities to share learning information. So Dr. Box, can you tell us what the colleges, the KCTCS colleges, are doing about summer term, and then how are they approaching fall term?
Well, Dr. Williams, for the summer, we did move all of our first summer term classes to an online delivery mode. However, we're looking at maybe in July in our second term to be able to add some more face-to-face classes such as welding and things that are in our technical programs. But primarily for the first summer term, that's the direction we would be going. Now, come the fall semester, we're very hopeful that we will be able to move back to our full array of class offerings, meaning that we will have face-to-face environment as well as our remote or online environment. However, with all of our face-to-face classes, we are adding a online component so that if for any reason a student cannot come to a class face-to-face on campus, they will have the resources there for them online too. We primarily expect that most of our face-to-face classes will be able to meet face-to-face, but also have an opportunity for the students to have that online supplement. So we think that's going to be very important for us as we move forward. One other piece that I wanted to mention, you know, 1/3 of our whole mission is working with business and industry in workforce training. And we're certainly not going to slow that down. And in fact, we know that we are all going through this transformation. Business and industry is going through a transformation right now about how they're doing their work. And we're trying to adjust to that too. But we're going to be partnering with our business and industries as we go forward in the fall.
Thank you. Dr. Thompson, do you mind speaking to how the regionals and research institutions are looking at summer and fall?
Sure, and I need to go back on one of the questions you asked earlier, and just to say that, you know, Kentucky was one of the first states to respond to COVID-19 as far as higher education goes. So we really reacted fast. And over the spring break and a couple of days longer, we skilled up as many of our staff as we possibly can to not have as much of a downturn in learning as some of the other states were dealing with. Their universities and really, I think, did a great job. As Jay spoke to earlier, KCTCS, they were already on the forefront. It was an easier transition, but for many of our institutions that may have had 5-6% in that online setting, I had to go a long way. So we're still working on that as we are doing it. We're still skilling people up and helping them to perform not just the online academic endeavor, but the online social and student support endeavor, the co-curricular, because this is extremely important for those that choose to go to universities. The other thing that we're doing in many of our institutions, will we be doing even more, we want to continue doing what we feel is really good for summer school, if you want to call it that. We work with teachers a lot in their skilling up for a master's degree or some other professional development. Many of our institutions are offering even a discount to have students do this. We're doing this online. So we will have summer school at least online. As Dr. Bach said, maybe toward the end of the summer, depends on how this goes, we may even have some hybrid. What we know in the fall, and as a matter of fact, as soon as I get off this webinar, I'm going to have to get on with the presidents. Now we're talking about what does it mean to actually fully open higher education again, and when will we do that? And what we are talking about as much as anything else, and once again, we're getting guidance from the governor and CDC and other folk to make sure we do this safely. But what we're talking about truly is keeping up, and I think President Ramsey said this a minute ago, and I think this is important. We're not just keeping up this attainment process that we're looking at getting people through. Kentucky, over the last couple of years, has done a great job there. So we're wanting to continue that, but we know that we're going to have to re-recruit many of our students to come into a new environment. My guess is we'll have face-to-face class, no doubt, but maybe social distancing in that class. My guess is we'll have a lot of hybrid classes. There's a good chance that people could be teaching in a classroom with now 15 students instead of 30, but yet talking to another 150 online while they're doing that. We're talking about really expanding our online bases, if you will, looking at quality. What we know is we will be open in some form. The other thing universities have to deal with, that many of these residential campuses, I mean, our whole setup has been around non-social distancing. It's been set up as building community in a face-to-face environment. So if you think about our residence halls or dining halls, if you think about classrooms, nothing we did said you need to be away from everybody. So this is a cultural change for us too. So we're having to culturally get our students ready for this, as well as our faculty and staff. So we're doing that now, and we will continue to do that into the fall. We also have football, we have basketball, we have all of these other items that are crucial to higher ed in many ways, right? And not only just for the resources they bring in, but also for the dynamic elements of co-curricular. So all of these items we're looking at having to deal with. So it's not just for us, we're talking about opening up based on what I call the academic endeavor or the classroom setting. It's also talking about creating a community that still provides to our students what they need to provide. We're also doing this in times where we've had 12 years of budget cuts. So we're trying to do this economically. I mean, we're going to have a very low tuition this year because we all recognize the importance of not putting this on the back of parents. While at the same time, our resources are dwindling so fast, we can't even measure it, and we're trying to. So these are all the things we're in the process of doing now, but just let everybody know, as Dr. Bach said, we still see ourselves in our four-year institutions as representing that population that we need to represent in order for them to be active in the workforce in a job that matters. So we have to give them a degree that not only provides them with the technical skills, but also those employability skills. So we have to look at clinicals, how we do that. And just relaxing the guidelines doesn't necessarily increase the quality. So it's more than just saying we've got access. We've got to talk about how do we provide that rigor and that excellence within that setting that gives them what they need to be successful. One last thing, Chris, we look at this truly from the lens of equity. We can't leave anybody behind. There are people that are disenfranchised coming into a normal system of higher education. They're going to be even more disenfranchised now because many may not have internet service or the equipment. So higher ed has provided, in many cases, equipment for them to do that, and KCTCS and others have opened their campuses up and the Wi-Fi so they can get engaged with that. So those are just a few things that we are, in fact, this very second working on.
Dr. Thompson, I want to move in a minute to your point and Dr. Box's point on preparation and support of the workforce. But before we do that, I know that one really big barrier to people coming back to work is their kids at home and being worried about their care during the day. So our faculty are teaching, our staff are helping students. They're also helping their own children or have their own children in their care. So I'm going to take just a minute and ask that that we just speak to childcare for a second. So Ms. Ramsey, there's been a question going across the chat and from some of the participants or some of the pre-registrants about how various other organizations can help accommodate some of this. How might libraries work in? How might churches or others also help with childcare? And I wondered if the Pritchard Committee and you had a comment on that.
Well, I think the concern, Chris, as we all know, is large groups of people, even children, congregating in the same place, and that causing the spread of the coronavirus. So this has been an incredible, potentially decimating impact on childcare if we're not careful. And so the concern from some of those asking questions about the availability of childcare when they have to go back to work is a critical concern, no doubt. And I think we may have to think differently about how we deliver childcare services. So some examples might be thinking about children in smaller groups. So home-based, family-based childcare, which we saw much more of a generation ago than we see today. But families may be looking for those smaller environments. And I think we want to make sure from a system standpoint that we're able to embrace those smaller home-based, family-based, community-based environments and support them to have the level of quality that we would expect in a child care setting. Not only the health and safety, but the quality around the providers' level of knowledge around child development, and some other well-being types of issues. So it's a huge nut to crack, but I do think if we think ahead to a new normal, we need to think about that ecosystem of childcare, smaller spaces for childcare to happen, and how we ensure that through this pandemic, we're still supporting those childcare, the childcare workforce industry, so that there's something for them to go back to and they're prepared to go back to that.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Commissioner Brown, in the chat, you've noted that summer programs are going to be very much at the discretion of the local school districts. As we head back to school in the fall, you know, you're also talking about possibly staggered groups of students in a building. It might be that a family has, you know, students going one day and then the next day they have students. How do you see the schools helping people who need to go back physically to work, supporting their kids in this time?
I think districts and teachers have to be mindful of, and we all know that we're just hearing anecdotally from around the state, and that parents are under an extreme amount of stress just from the things we discussed already on this webinar, just from the economic situation, the lack of childcare, but then also we're adding another layer onto that because they're also becoming teachers and assisting in the instruction of their children using non-traditional the non-traditional instruction. We've heard about, there was a comment here in the chat about hearing reports of families not answering calls from teachers. Some of that could just be due to sheer exhaustion and just not having enough time or bandwidth to be able to do all the tasks that need to be done at home, in addition to teaching and assisting with homework. So I think we have to be mindful of that. We're learning more and more, and districts are learning about remote instruction. And we've said before that remote instruction today in our school districts is better than it was on March 16th, and it will be better on May 15th. Than it is today. And we know that there's a lot that we need to do to improve that. But I think as districts become more adept and teachers become more used to this format, I think it will be a little bit better for parents. But we understand that it is very frustrating for them. And also knowing that parents have relied on the school district for summer activities, extended school services that obviously happen there at a school facility, either after school or in the summer. And we just know that is not going to be able to happen this summer, and will all have to happen virtually. And then if it's happening virtually, then that means that child is there in that home.
All right, well, thank you. It's going to be all of us together to move this process forward. And I realize it's also rapidly evolving as we get new guidance and things change. So let's switch now to our workforce development. We know that we're facing big challenges and much unknown as we restart. What unique challenges will we see as education providers and organizations, and how are your institutions rising to meet those challenges? And I'm going to ask Dr. Box that you start with what challenges and opportunities for the workforce the Kentucky Community and Technical College system is seeing, and how well have we respond?
Yeah, Dr. Williams, you know, one of the great things about being involved with community colleges is historically we've been known for our ability to innovate and come up with new ideas and be very flexible on delivery systems and how we respond to challenges. Responding to challenges right now is huge. I've told all the college presidents that if you're a leader that thrives on challenges, you are now living in the best of times, because you do have a tremendous number of challenges ahead of you. But, you know, because of our relationships that we have with businesses and industries, we're able to go to them and say, what can we do to help you? We know you're going through a transformation. Tell us what you're doing. We will adjust our teaching, both in the classroom, for the pipeline that supplies them future workers, and for the immediate retraining and retooling of those individuals they have in their current workforce or need to quickly get into their workforce. We expect that once this is over, companies will be rehiring. And that's going to be a huge piece for us, that we've got to help those businesses and industries to be able to respond to that new hiring. And we will quickly work with them to retool people, reskill people. Plus, we'll change on the inside with our delivery of our programming. And I think that's going to be critical as we go forth. And one of the things that we're really focused on is doing a better job of tracking and documenting the competencies or skills that our students are learning. Because as companies are adjusting, they're going to want to know what skill sets our graduates are coming out with. And we think we can do that with a new type of transcript that's called an interoperable learning record. And that's being pushed by the President Trump's American Workforce Policy Advisory Board. And we hope to be moving to that within the next year.
We need to come up with a better name, though.
I know, I hate that.
Well, thank you, Dr. Box. I am going to ask you a follow-up question. Are you seeing a focus in any particular program areas that you think will be helpful in getting the economy back up and running?
Well, we know healthcare is going to be huge because there's been quite a strain on the healthcare area all the way during this whole pandemic. We also think that manufacturing will rebound, and of course they've had to adjust. We know what the auto manufacturers have been doing in Kentucky to move away from making automobiles to helping provide the supplies and equipment for the healthcare industry. But in particular, we think number one will be healthcare, probably manufacturing, and then probably next IT, because with everyone moving into remote learning, there's been quite a bit more demand for people to understand that, and IT specialist is going to be in high demand, we think.
Thank you. Dr. Thompson, you've already spoken to the universities and the Council on Post-Secondary Education's focus on innovation, on essential skills. Can you take that farther? What challenges and opportunities are you seeing, and how do you expect response?
Thank you, Dr. Williams. I think it is important that we also understand that our four-year institutions are workforce institutions. I mean, I know of no one that decides to go to college and say, hey, I don't want a great job when I get out. So one of the things that we were doing before this, and we'll do even more, is to focus on that connectivity between what you're doing and being prepared for and the ultimate career you want. I think that's essential. So in the new normal, we're going to have to do that more. The other thing I will tell you is that, as I mentioned at the onset of this conversation, that we are going to have about 60% of our workforce having some credential that matters by 2030 for us to be engaged at a level we need to in a strong economic development long-term system. And to do that, we're going to have to provide more work-based learning opportunities. So we were in the process of doing that. As a matter of fact, one of my goals, as you both know, is to have all of our students, either in high school or college, have a work-based learning experience before 2030. So now we're going to do that in a digital way. As a matter of fact, I've reorganized my office to actually focus on this as well as workforce development, because that is about what we do. The other item is, as Jay pointed out so rightly, that some of the items that we needed in the past, we still need, but now we need to put them on steroids. I mean, when we think about healthcare, I'm also the vice chair of the largest health care system in Kentucky. And I tell you that it's more than just being prepared to do nursing, it's now how we do nursing. We've seen that, right? There's going to have to also be more, not just in IT and so on, but how we focus on digitally creating new machinery. We're going to have more chemists. We're going to have more folk that are willing to be researchers. So our graduate degrees are going to be more important than ever. Because what we figured out is that we didn't have enough capacity to solve this issue as fast as we need to. We're going to have people that can do better predictive statistics. You know, I would say that as a statistician, of course. But the idea that there's so many items now are more important than ever. What we have to do, though, that we have to work with employers at such a level. We have to work with K-12 and higher ed at such a level that everything we have purview over has a seamless way of thinking about what we're trying to get accomplished. Because we're going to have to get skilled up fast, and we're going to have the people to do it. One of the concerns I have, and if you looked at our progress report, lots of positives to talk about. But a concern is that we can't do this if only 51.5% of our students are graduating from high school go to college. Because we have evidence in return on investment, you just don't make it without a credential. So this is very much a workforce item that we talked about then, that we will talk about even more now. Now, how we deliver that is important. We've got to get more adults in our four-year institutions to come back to school. So we're going to have to think differently about how we deliver to that population. That's more important than ever. So the items we're talking about, just not how or what degrees we need, but we're going to put more emphasis on getting more baccalaureate degrees, getting more people to transfer from KCTCS to get in this pipeline, getting more people with graduate degrees. So we have to do this at a level. We're going to have to train more teachers now more than ever to do business differently in our teacher prep programs. And I'm sure that Commissioner Brown would agree with that. So some of the things that we needed to do before, it's still on the forefront. Some of these items haven't changed. What may have changed that we're going to focus on is how innovatively we treat those items. How then do we get people engaged in that conversation that looks toward the end result, but knowing now the end result may be 6 months down the road, and how then we build on that to get the outputs that we need for our workforce. So my goal is not just to provide an opportunity to have those employability outcomes of critical thinking, creative output, problem solving, working with people of diverse backgrounds, but how do we do that in the process of working with our employers? How do we do that in the process of working with students in the 7th grade, as well as students in the first year of college? So these are the items that we are focused on.
Thanks very much. Commissioner Brown, you heard a lot of talk about pathways there, and clearly you're leading the group that starts those pathways. What challenges are you seeing about getting your students ready to go right into the workforce or transfer on some additional post-secondary, given the new circumstances around COVID-19?
I'm really concerned about the social emotional aspect of it. We're hearing anecdotally that students are having a difficult time in many cases adjusting, and heard from a education co-op director. She had observed and had talked to some parents where they've noticed their children that are normally outgoing kids, and now they're hiding behind their parents' legs. For elementary kids, for high school, middle school kids, are noticing normally outgoing children are going to their rooms, slamming their doors, which may be typical teenage behavior. But the point being that we're seeing some behaviors and basically signs of depression and anxiety because it is such a different environment, and things that are normal are now not happening in their lives, and the social emotional toll that it's taking on them, we're starting to see those signs. So I'm concerned about that, because these students, obviously, particularly our seniors, will be taking this with them into the workplace. And for the seniors, there will not be the type of closure and the type of celebration that they deserve in their communities, even though school districts are trying to make up for that in various ways. So I think that's a concern. But I also think we have to be paying attention to what the business community is saying about how we are educating students. And, we've had a lot of discussions over the years about soft skills. And I know that and we've not all the time done a good job in K-12 in assisting and producing students that have those skills, and we are trying to get better with that. But we also know that because our world has changed, there are going to be differing employability skills that that the employers will need to see from our students, and we have to maintain the conversation, have types of events like we're having today to make sure we have open communication and dialogue between education and the employers, I think is crucial.
Do you see these changes affecting your career and technical education programs?
I do. The second day, I think that we were into the first week of the crisis, I received an email that one of our CTE students had developed a way on a 3D printer and developed a prototype and started manufacturing face shields within about 12 hours, which is just a sign of the ingenuity that we have with our students. So I think it is going to affect it, and how we deliver that instruction, particularly the lab-based instruction, that's going to be difficult. Some of that can be done virtually, and Dr. Box touched on it, but there are some things such as welding and others that we're hoping to get students into that and finish and complete that lab experience by the summer, but then that may not be able to happen. It's hard to weld a piece of metal using your mouse, and so virtual is great, but it is not. It's just not applicable to some applications that we need our students to have that hands-on experience.
Thanks very much. Bridget, we see the Pritchard Committee sometimes as being early childhood education, but really you are looking at the whole pathway from the beginning to adults to lifelong learning. Where do you see the Pritchard Committee's role in how we move all this education forward?
Yeah, that's right, Chris. Thank you. So we are focused on everything from early childhood through post-secondary, and we're focused on those education outcomes as a means to move individuals, families, communities, and our state forward. So the fact of the matter is, Kentucky, even with all of our progress in education over the last generation, is still fifth from the bottom of the nation in poverty. And so that should weigh, I think, on us all heavily as we think about coming out of this pandemic. Going into it, where there was a lot of pressure to increase education outcomes. And we see really positive movement coming out of post-secondary, our colleges and universities, KCTCS, with the recent report from the Council on Post-Secondary Education. We're on track to meet that goal of 60% of Kentuckians with a post-secondary degree or credential by 2030. And so we want to continue down that path, because we know one of the things that holds us back as an economy and then holds our communities and families back is low educational attainment. So yes, it's about those post-secondary degrees and credentials, and it's about the pipeline that leads up to those post-secondary degrees and credentials. So we can't let this moment in time allow us to loosen up on any sense of urgency to move those academic outcomes forward and to close achievement gaps that have persisted over the years, even as we've improved outcomes for all students. So those students right now that are, as Commissioner Brown talked about, who we're having a harder time connecting with, it's so important that when we get back to them, we're able to quickly evaluate where they are and move with urgency to help them move forward. They will depend on their progress, and their families will, their communities will, and our state will. So we're thinking about all of that as we think about the pipeline of education. As we think about coming out of this pandemic and the things that we really need to focus on to create some stability, Chris, you already mentioned childcare. That's going to be critical for the workforce to stabilize, and that workforce includes our educators. So how are we going to respond to the need for childcare? Even if we're intermittently working remotely, our families, our working families, are still going to need some level of childcare. How many people on this call today, and have we all heard from, that are trying to manage full-time work with full-time parenting now? That's not sustainable. So we've got to figure out childcare, and we've got to figure it out with innovation in mind. The other piece that I think that concerns us that we've got to stabilize is access to broadband. So our information highway or infrastructure. So there are far too many areas in the state where it's still difficult to maintain a constant, strong connection. And that's going to hold us back from remote learning and from remote working, whether it's intermittent or for long stretches of time.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I think you bring up two really good points. It's hard to work remotely if you can't access the internet and get the information that you need. So we have about 7-8 minutes left here. I'm going to ask a question to sort of wrap up and give you the opportunity to share a message. What message do you want the business leaders on this call to hear? What opportunities or support ideas for these leaders do you have as you're looking forward from your lens in your institution? So Commissioner Brown, I'm going to ask you to start us off. What message do you want business leaders to hear?
I think I want them to understand that we want to continue and strengthen our relationship with the business community. And I'm a student of the Education Reform Act. And I remember where I was sitting when that was passed, and it is not lost on me that all of that would not have happened with the Rose decision and that leadership, but for the involvement of Kentucky's business and industry leaders. And so that is just as important now as it was in the 80s and 90s, and we need to continue that relationship and continue to have these conversations. And it's not just having a conversation and having a meeting. There are things that need to get done that require business and industry input. And a perfect example is we do an annual review of our career and technical education standards, and that requires us to, we can't just sit in a room in Frankfurt and draft that. We could, but we need to know from business and industry of the standards and the outputs that you need to see from us. And obviously this upcoming year will be more important than ever, because we know this crisis is drastically changing our economy and what employers need to see. And so and of course you'll be dealing with a new commissioner. So because I am not a candidate, will not be the permanent commissioner, but that will actually be something. I have a folder ready for that new person, whoever he or she may be. And that will be one of the major things that I do in a debriefing, is talking about the relationship with the chamber and with the business and industry. Is crucial.
Thanks very much. Bridget, what about you? What would the Pritchard Committee be saying to business leaders?
Well, I think business leaders are at the forefront right now experiencing this impact for the economy. And so before we went into the pandemic, the forecast for national GDP growth was 2.2%. The forecast for growth in Kentucky was 0.8%. The reason for that gap in growth is low educational attainment. So we can't let up on a big push to increase our educational attainment through this pandemic. We've got to stay the course. And business leaders can play a huge role in that, in supporting, encouraging, identifying ways to credential, skill up their workforce, and support those who may attach to their workforce to skill up as well. So thinking innovatively about those certificates, credentials, how we credential. I think, Jay, you mentioned at the beginning, how we credential those skills that the workforce already has that we're not currently credentialing. So let's think innovatively there, and I think the business community can help us there. The business community already underscores the need for transferable skills, employability skills, as we heard President Thompson mention. So how do we make sure everything we're doing is helping develop in all of our young people and adults those transferable employability skills, creativity, communication, problem solving, that will serve us well into the future economy that none of us can even imagine. And so with that in mind, the future economy, I'd also encourage business leaders to think innovatively at the local level, and to think about what makes Kentucky unique. Kentucky, yes, we have a few big cities, but by and large, we are a rural state with a lot of mid-size and small-size cities. So how can that be a benefit for us? How can that be a competitive advantage for Kentucky as we move forward in the future economy and in a new normal that requires maybe something very different of us than big cities like New York and Chicago and Los Angeles have typically provided? So let's think together as Kentuckians through the lens of excellence with equity and innovation for a big, bold future that allows us to turn the corner on the inside of the track, not behind and on the outside as we head into Derby weekend.
Thanks very much. Dr. Box, what does KCTCS want business leaders to know?
First and foremost, I want business leaders to know that we are your partner. And that word partner means a two-way street. We're more than willing to adjust our teaching, our service to the industry, but we need to hear from them about what they want. We need them to work with us. For example, I've been setting aside close to $1 million a year in innovation grants for our colleges to come up with ways to teach their programs that attract and work with the working adult. And I would love to hear from our business partners for ideas of what they would like to see. The more they can give us ideas of how they're transforming, we can put that into our innovation grant criteria and help our institutions transform themselves in a quick and expedient way.
Thank you. Dr. Thompson, you want to take us out on why higher education and all education matter? What's your message to business?
Thank you, Dr. Williams. First of all, thank you and the Chamber and all these folks on this webinar. They're partners of ours, so we appreciate you. The first thing I'll say, let me be clear how I say this. You know, Kevin mentioned the need. I mean, mental health concerns are huge, and I just want to go back and say that first. We see it increasing so much even before this and more now. We've got to focus on that. And business and industry can help us do that too. But more than anything else in higher education, it does matter. It matters to the economy. It matters to the workforce. We have the most direct correlation to all of that, but it has to be done in partnership. I agree with Jay 100% when he says that it's not just us asking you, what do we need to do for you? It's vice versa. And I'm asking business and industry to come to the table with offerings, not just come and say, you're not doing this, but come to the table and say, let's do this together. Here's some ideas. We have to move to a learner's paradigm also in higher education. We, in fact, have been lost in this teaching paradigm. We've got knowledge we want to share. We'll give it to the students. We'll give it to the employers. The argument is that we bring to the table so many differences. So how can employers be a part with us in shaping the learning? How can we be partners together in K12 and every place else? You know, as Dr. Box knows, it's hard for me to talk about just universities when I represent all of higher education. And what we know is that employers don't get what they need unless we give them a credentialed employee that can actually be skilled up when they need to be. So how do we do that on the front end of shaping the paradigm, not on the back end of just actually doing what they need to do at the time when they graduate? So we're asking employers more than anything else, first of all, to recognize higher education matters in Kentucky now more than ever. Secondarily, partnerships matter more than ever. And thirdly, it has to be a seamless partnership where all of us are coming to the table and not pointing fingers at the other for not doing what they were supposed to do, but coming together as a collective in order to do the things that we have to do in order to make Kentucky everything it can possibly be. So thank you, Dr. Williams and Travis.
Thank you, and thanks to all the panelists. It's been a pleasure to hear from you today and a pleasure to explore where we're going. And I hope we can come back and see how our predictions are doing and how well we're moving forward with quality and excellence. I want to thank the Chamber for the opportunity today and turn this back over to Travis.
No, again, thank you all, and thanks for everyone that's been with us. We've had a great turnout. We've had some great discussion, and again, I just want to thank the panelists for talking with us and also being so active on the chat box. There's been a lot of good discussion in the chat box as well. Just as a reminder, this webinar has been a part of the Restart Kentucky series, and we will be making this available on our website, kychamber.com. So feel free to check that out following today, and this whole discussion should be there along with our other discussions. There's also more webinars coming up. We're going to be talking next week about legal liability reform and some other interesting topics following that. So if you'd be interested, please visit our website for more information on this Restart Kentucky webinar series. And we again want to thank KCTCS for partnering with us on that. Last thing, one last big thank you from the Kentucky Chamber to all of our panelists today. I hope everyone has a great afternoon. Feel free to contact us with any questions. Thank you again.